So Patrick will be known to many of you. He has spoken here before. He is very much a free speech campaigner. His 21st Century Wire website has been like one of the key places to go for years to find out what's really going on. And more recently, his work with UK Column and so on has really brought him absolutely into the fray. Because we do live in a world where we are simply not told the truth. And the mainstream media, what it is feeding us, it needs pointing out. And yet so many people are under the hypnosis. But today, hopefully, we're going to try and overcome a few of those illusions, and Patrick's going to show us how the illusions work. So please, a big hand for Patrick Henningsen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andy, Thomas, and thank you for the invitation to speak. It's great to be here. It's been a couple of years since I've been back here, and the world has changed, hasn't it? The world has changed incredibly. Our realities have been shuffled, and our brains have been juggled, and all sorts of crazy things have gone on. And I'm sure I'm not alone that people sitting here in this room, like myself, I am a very different person than I was 2 or 3 years ago because of what I've gone through, what you guys have all gone through, what we've all experienced together. So our realities, our lives, our assumptions, things have been challenged. They've really been challenged. And there is something that's happening right now. It's undeniable. It's called a great awakening. And I always wondered when I was going to see this happen or how many decades it would take to happen, but it was accelerated. It was accelerated because of the conditions that were set in motion. And we'll talk about this today. There have been times, challenging times in history, and we are a product of our environment. We're a product of our times. We're a product of those challenges. And the question is whether we're going to rise to meet those challenges. We all have to do that individually, do that collectively, as a community too, as a nation, as a people or a tribe, whatever, however you identify yourself with, we have to rise to this challenge because our ancestors did many, many, many times. There's a French author and philosopher, famous saying, Alphonse Carr, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So we can find some peace in that. We can find some solace in that. Amongst the chaos, amid all the noise, we can find some peace in that. So the question is, though, can we learn the lessons of history to help us through this time today? Because things are the same as they were before. Things have changed, things are the same, but they're slightly different. So we have to adapt a little bit to that. That's what we'll talk about today. So we're definitely on the brink right now in Western civilization. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about that. We are on the brink. We've been pushed to the max. I don't think anybody can argue with this. What happened in the last 2 years wasn't just local, wasn't just national, wasn't just regional, it was global. Okay, this was a global phenomenon, and I'm positing that this was a natural progression of a cycle of our civilization. You could say Western civilization, which is dominating the globe. We got a taste of what the end game is for that, what the end result looks like. A totally unforgiving corporate monoculture that demands absolute conformity. No room for questioning, no deviations, absolute conformity. There is no alternative. You will do it this way. You will get vaccinated this way. You will take this test. You will stay at home. You will watch what you say on social media. Otherwise, you will be canceled. There is no room for movement. That's what I believe is late stage Western civilization, late stage empire. What we're witnessing is something called entropy. Okay? There's a chaotic element to it. But this is definitely the degrading of all the things that have been built up over the years, and it's happening very quickly. I'll talk about the civilizational cycles in a minute. But we have a few challenges. So there's always been disruptive technologies and disruptive things that have been introduced. The printing press. Before this invention, knowledge was not democratized. It was the purview of a few elites, of monarchs, of their children, their inner circle, the Mandarin class, the bureaucratic class, not for the general population. But Gutenberg's printing press democratized knowledge and information. Okay? And the result of that was world-changing. It literally rewrote the map of the world. It changed a lot of things. So this was the beginning of a cycle. This was the beginning of the cycle. And this was a massive threat. You see, you talk about cancel culture, what we're experiencing today with big tech, the government media complex. The government used to have full control over the relationship with media and the dispersal of information. Very easy, just control the tops of the major corporations. Then the internet came. Then there was a period of chaos before these social media monopolies arrived on the scene, and the establishment thought it's now time to censor speech and discourse, but not locally, not nationally. What happens in Palo Alto, in the Silicon Valley, at Facebook Inc., with Mark Zuckerberg and the former liberal Democrat Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, who's in charge of global relations. What happens there is not just a United States censorship thing. We all get censored everywhere on the planet. They hit a button, it's global. Same with Twitter, same with YouTube, same with Google. Slight differences amongst regions, depending on the politics, because after all, they want to operate and stay in business in those countries, so they have to do things slightly different, depending on who the dictator is or whatever. But that's a global thing. We've never faced this before, so it's very different than this revolution here. Now, we had star chambers in this country, Henry VIII, shutting down, chasing book publishers, chasing people printing illicit material. And then something happened in the United States that was a game changer. The literacy rate exploded in the colonies. This is before they were the United States. This is when they were British colonies, and pamphlets started circulating. Pamphlets like Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And that's a game changer. And the result of that was a new country and a new superpower and a reordering of the world order. Now, I'm not going to make a value judgment of whether any of this is good or bad, or better than this outcome or not. I'm looking at these purely, objectively, as cycles, natural cycles of civilization. So here's another disruptive technology, radio. Radio. When radio came on the scene, it was treated like the internet Wild West is by the establishment today. They said it's unregulated, how are you going to control this? People are broadcasting. Orson Welles' War of the Worlds was a kind of beautiful example of what sort of chaos could ensue if someone put out what's the ultimate, which is a totally fictional scenario of an alien invasion, and quite a large percentage of the population of the Eastern Seaboard actually believed it was happening, and it caused chaos. The switchboards at the emergency services were overrun. The papers, the press, everybody was going crazy. And Orson Welles was really branded as a real heretic at the time, and a troublemaker and dangerous. Radio was dangerous. They said it would never work. Advertisers would never go to radio. But of course, after a few years, a lot of the advertising money made their way to radio, and print started the process of losing its revenue model, the print advertising. Disruptive. So now, after radio, this is the latest problem. And this is where we are today. Online disinformation. online disinformation. So there's all sorts of academics and studies and think tanks and government initiatives to study this problem of first it was fake news, now it's disinformation. That's a term coined by Joseph Stalin to disparage and rubbish and smear his political enemies, and our leaders in the West cherry-picked this beautiful Soviet term and are now using it against us, okay? Understand the history of that word and where it comes from. So misinformation, disinformation, these things didn't exist a couple of years ago. All of a sudden, they're a thing. Are they real? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there are. Here's Ireland, and this is when things really hit fever pitch. COVID disinformation. This is when I got canceled. And so many other journalists and colleagues and people were basically cleaned off of all of these online platforms. So this is the Irish government here. They've got this wonderful initiative here. See all the funding and sponsorship. Assessing the implementation of EU code on practice on disinformation in relation to COVID-19. These governments were pumping out total disinformation and misinformation. They got a new one called malinformation, mis-dis-mal. That's the conjugated short one there. They pumped out lie after exaggeration, after just outright propaganda, just completely false. Most of what was pumped out by governments and mainstream media from the beginning of the so-called global pandemic was provably false, And then I'm not even going to get into the vaccine claims and all the statements that were made at the time. But you weren't allowed to question it at the time because emotions were high. Emotions were high, a window opened, and that's when the traumatic attack happens. It's always at the immediate aftermath of the crisis of the event, and this is where the real work for government and media comes into play. So people are slightly confused, disoriented, traumatized. That's when we're hit with the hardest propaganda. And it's effective for a period of time, and then like all spells in sorcery, it eventually wears off. It's now wearing off in a big way, and you can see them panicking and doing things, still doing stuff like this. And I don't know if anybody saw that wonderful piece of, from the journalistic paragon, the BBC, did an anti-vaxxer program recently, an unbelievable piece of state propaganda, but really I wasn't too upset about it. I thought, this is good, this is really desperate. And you know what, the people that they targeted in there, they brought on to be bludgeoned by all these experts, hand-picked experts who work for Pfizer, who are independent, according to the BBC. The people that they lined up to be shot down as cranks and conspiracy theorists, I thought held their ground fairly well. And it didn't look very good for the BBC. It looked like they were trying a little too hard. And the people they were trying to smear and embarrass looked good, in my opinion. Not that I would advise anybody to go on the BBC. Of course, when they contact you for that sort of program, you sort of know what's going to happen. But tyranny always elicits resistance. This is a universal equation. Fascism, I don't want to get into a debate of how to define it. It can be defined many ways. Many different people have different conversations about it. But I'll pick one, which is, this is when the state punches down. It punches down on the people. And what you see now, this government in the UK, in the United States, they're constantly attacking the people, constantly punching down. It's your fault. It's your fault that the COVID tests cases are up. It's your fault that the vaccine hesitant percentages are too high. It's your fault. They're constantly attacking people, spreading disinformation. This is a absolute telltale feature of hard fascism throughout history. This is what we have now. This is what we have now. And it doesn't end there. It will go further than that if people allow it to, or if they're not aware of it or not paying attention to what's going on. The other thing you'll notice is when the policies get bad, when the failures mount up for government, for institutions, rather than back off, they double down. And we have all seen this to our horror, and we still see it today. This is very worrying. This is very worrying. There is a positive side to it, is that this is normally when the institutions or the authoritarians really reveal their true colors. And then this is where they really lose credibility. They're screaming in all of the reports. The online safety bill, the latest one, that people are losing faith in the institutions and they're losing trust in the media, and we need to do something about this. And it's because of that disinformation. It's because of the Russian disinformation. It's because of the COVID deniers. It's because of whatever, the conspiracy theorists. We need to do something about that. Of course, we know that nobody has done a better job of undermining the confidence in our institutions than our institutions themselves. Nobody has done a better job of undermining confidence in the media than the media itself. And their work is on display every day, every day. So this brings us to an important feature of this, okay? I was canceled for life by Twitter, by the way. They sent me an email saying, you are banned for life. And I don't think Elon Musk is going to help me on that one. But anyway, it was good. I had 100,000 followers. The count was blowing up, and I posted an article by John Rappaport. They got a strike there. Another one for Global Research about vaccine safety, and that was it. Shut down for life. Why would you ban someone for life? Just for posting other people's web articles on your, I had a blue check as well, it even did that. So this is something called the noble lie, okay, that's Socrates. In ancient Greece, there is this concept called the noble lie. This is very important to understand. Throughout history, whenever you have a ruling class, there's something called the noble lie. It's an ennobling fiction. It's an ennobling fiction by the ruling caste. It's a type of a lie or a deception that's for the good of the people or the plebs, and it will make them feel better about their station in life. That's called a noble lie. And this is an old, if you study ancient Greece or you read Plato's Republic and the discourse on the myth of the metals, and there's debates that are going on the utility of the noble lie, the morality of the noble lie, and people from different classes in society will make arguments in terms of order, in terms of how to organize society. This is a necessary feature of running a country or a society. And we're familiar with many of these noble lies. Certainly people at this conference, JFK, 9/11, 7/7, climate change, the Gulf of Tonkin, WMDs, and the list goes on and on. We find out later that these things aren't quite what they were marketed as. COVID-19, okay, vaccines are safe and effective. The establishment still to this day uses the noble lie. They believe in the noble lie. It's important to understand that you're dealing with people that honestly think that what they're doing is for the greater good. Climate change, man-made global warming. We need to reorganize society because of this theoretical threat, and you need to basically divest in everything, and we're going to give you a whole new program, and you need to do it now because it's happening now, and if we don't get it going now, as Greta says, our house is on fire, you're all basically guilty of destroying the next generation's life on Earth. That's a pretty big accusation there, but yeah, she's very flamboyant, Greta. She's got a good, very convincing. So there's another one. It's called Thomas Malthus's population bomb. That's another noble lie, and that's very much combined with climate change. Climate change leads to Malthusian population control. Nobody likes to talk about it, but that's what underpins the entire World Economic Forum Great Reset agenda. It is the unspoken, rarely spoken of, although spoken of much earlier, 100 years ago. Rockefellers, the elites, were more open about this when eugenics was trendy among the elites. Overpopulation, big problem. This is also a noble lie, because if you look at the birth rates and the replacement rates of the West, Western Europe, and now India and China will not be able to replace their populations according to the current death and birth rates. In other words, the global population has already peaked or is in the process of peaking, hitting the top of that bell curve, and it will decline after that. Okay, so think about that. And there's a good book called The Empty Planet, written by 2 Canadian authors. Think about that. That's the moral justification. You saw the Georgia Guidestones get blown up a couple weeks ago. It was right there in stone. That's the moral and the existential and religious justification for doing what they do. So here's some noble lies. Our economy is tanking. Everybody, inflation, economy tanking. Who do you blame? Russia. Of course it's Russia. They invaded Ukraine. Russia's to blame. The virus, because the virus shut down everything, right? Paid us to stay at home and don't do anything. Climate, of course, because we need to invest in all this green energy. And so the reality is this: Russia didn't do anything to our economy. Our governments did by sanctioning them. And the virus didn't destroy our economy. Lockdowns did. Government policy did. Track and trace and test and trace did. Okay? Vaccine passports or COVID passes, that's what destroyed our economy and our societies. And climate, actually no, net zero carbon policies by government, deliberate policies, have been hugely disruptive and have helped to drive up the cost of not just fuel, but everything else as an accelerant. So here's another noble lie. This is Klaus Schwab, the spiritual leader, head of the World Economic Forum at Davos. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow opportunity, a window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Who's reimagining? I guess they're reimagining. And here we are, 2,000 years before, it was the ruling class in ancient Greece or Rome, and here we have again, they're reimagining how society should be and how we should live. And they're going to try to implement it. And it's happening very fast. So that's a good example of a noble lie. They really believe this is best for the planet. And I'm telling you this about population, about the canard of overpopulation and geometric population bombs. Okay, you can believe me or not, but do research it, because the answers are out there. And there's people who are presenting things today, whether it's to do with virology, whether it's to do with population, sustainability, climate. They're not presenting both sides of the argument. In fact, they're attacking anybody that's presenting anything that goes against what is the political consensus. So it's not a fair debate. So it is up to us to make it a fair debate. And that's not easy. It's not going to be easy. So back to the noble lie. And Gulf of Tonkin, that's an interesting one. The United States felt that the threat of communism was so great in the early 1960s, they had to lie about the attack on U.S. Naval vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam, and the result was absolute horror for Southeast Asia and for America as well. Okay, but that was a noble lie. That was Lyndon Baines Johnson believed that was something that had to be done at the time for the greater good. And don't question their sincerity on that. So what's interesting is when you read, this is a stunning quote It's from a piece called The Decline of the West, and it's by Oswald Spengler. And he said, today, this is 1928, he said, today we live so cowed under the bombardment of this intellectual artillery, the media, that hardly anyone can attain to inward detachment that is required for a clear view of the monstrous drama. The will to power, operating under a pure democratic disguise, has finished off its masterpiece so well that the object's sense of freedom is actually flattered by the most thoroughgoing enslavement that has ever existed. 1928. That's absolutely incredible. And you know what? This author, not alone, not alone. You look back in history, you can find these prescient passages. Like we said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But what clarity they had even back during that tumultuous time. That was a tumultuous time, the turn of the 20th century. From the 19th century to the 20th century. There was an industrial revolution. Technology was coming on board. They didn't have any regulation. Toxic things were introduced into the population that had huge health ramifications for a lot of people. Asbestos, vaccines, DDT, radium, just to name a few. A lot of this stuff was scapegoated as viruses because the Rockefeller Foundation decided at that time they're going to take over the pharmaceutical industry and also medical schools in America. They'll take over the funding and all the peer-reviewed medical journals, even to a large degree to this day. Okay, this is not a level playing field, but nonetheless. So that's an interesting statement. And this is the snake eating its tail, and this is what Spengler was alluding to. The Ouroboros, or Ouroboros. This is what happens to Western civilization eventually. But the question is that part of a cycle, or is that the end in itself? And I think the answer is that it's both. It's both. Our Western civilization is a snake, is eating its tail, but it's part of a bigger cycle. And this was a quote that's got a lot of traction recently. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. This is from the book Those Who Remain by G. Michael Hopf. This is a post-apocalyptic story. This has been used a lot. People have even written books based on this quote since that. But it is kind of representative of the incredible advances that we've enjoyed over the last century, especially, but even further back than that. So the question is, where do we sit on this continuum? Where are we amongst all this? So are we in the entropy stage right now? What can we do about it? And there's been many civilizations throughout history. Spengler also explains this in his book, whether it's ancient Babylon, whether it's ancient India, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, the Aztec, Mayan civilizations as well. And the last three I've reserved for our epoch here. So roughly 1,000 years, and it's cyclical. And normally the entropy sets in and the degradation happens from within. And it is often a result of technological innovations or advances. It means the old order simply cannot keep up with technology, with innovation, with changes in the environment, with changes in people's knowledge, changes in people's attitudes to certain things that were long held supposed truths within a society. Many of these civilizations that went into slow decline, that's one of the things that helped that process. I would argue that we're in that stage now. The question is, where are we heading after this? What is the end result going to be? And you've got Google at the end, so this is where we're at right now. We're into a digital phase right now, and I don't know, I'm a lot more impressed with some of those upper images than I am with some of the lower images, but having said that, some of those civilizations might be very impressed with our civilization, certain parts of it. So there is no doubt that our institutions are failing massively. Our academic institutions have completely failed. I think they're beyond repair. They're hunting down academics right now and attacking them for telling the truth, whether it's the truth about the conversation on the war in Syria, or whether it's on COVID-19 or vaccines or 9/11. Academics are being routed out of their positions. Okay, so that institution should be the ballast for all knowledge. It's now massively damaged, and I don't think it can be repaired. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But it's important to understand, among all this, that to understand how the concept of totalitarianism works. You have authoritarianism pushing down, and totalitarianism is when it's all pervasive. In a totalitarian society, the phenomenon comes from the ground up. Okay, it's people self-policing. It's people doing the work for the authoritarians. That's a totalitarian society or a civilization or government. Okay, important to know the distinction between those two. So people believe that this is grassroots belief because they have been led to believe that through the manufacturing of consent. And one of the good contributions of Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman was that book, that great work, The Manufacturing of Consent, in 1992 or 1993. Around that time, unfortunately, not everybody of that political disposition still uses that framework. They've abandoned it. But it's making the people think that there are certain truths, and then they will then self-police and attack any dissenters. And the establishment, the government, the ruling class is quite happy. That's an effective system. It's worked many times in history. And the important thing is that you believe that these are organic ideas. You believe they're grassroots. That's the important part. That's what makes it work. And this is the big challenge we have right now with our media. Technocrats, you've heard the term technocracy. Klaus Schwab is a technocrat. I'll give you a very simple explanation of what a technocrat is. A technocrat is the technocracy is different from the polity, or the political economy, or the politics. The technocrat believes they've identified all the problems, and they're going to assemble the experts, and the experts are going to provide the solutions, and they are above any reproach on that. Their authority is unquestioned, and they need to get on and do the job. That's a technocracy. That's what you have in Davos with the World Economic Forum. That's what the Great Reset is. That is the result of a technocracy. They would like to implement a technocracy. Our governments at the moment are in the process of implementing a technocracy because they believe they've identified the problems: climate change, overpopulation, disinformation. And they've got their experts, and not everybody's vaccinated enough. We need to get 100%, as Bill Gates said. 8 billion people need to get jabs in arms. Okay? They think that it's the virus, it's the climate, it's the population, it's the sustainability, it's the lack of whatever, food, it's Putin. The technocrat is going to come in, and they're absolutely sure and with total conviction, and they have the means. At the moment, they have the money, they'll assemble the experts. And there's no debate. There is no alternative. So that's what we're being challenged with right now. The politician traditionally would keep the experts and the scientists at arm's length, because a good, wise politician or leader would know how corruptible a scientist can be depending on who is sponsoring him, for instance. Okay, the scientific dictatorship is one of the most pernicious of all dictatorships. Huxley warned about this in his books, these dystopian classics. But that's the technocrat. So you have to, you're saying, where do I fit into this? Well, you can look at what the problems are. Are those actually problems? Are those the problems? Because if those aren't the problems, then everything you've lined up and stacked up, and every program, and you're going to reformat our economy and give us central bank digital currency, and you're going to give us all these different things, but those aren't the problems. Those aren't problems. And they're not impending, and they're not urgent. So everything you've built up, which we're facing right now, is useless. It's not fit for purpose. But at what point does the project take precedent over the logic? And this is where civilizations fall off the cliff. Is those in power, they double down, they triple down, they can't stop because their ego's on the line, their career's on the line, their power is on the line, their dynasty is on the line. They can't stop, they have to go forward. Even if you show them, and I have shown to people in good positions what seems to be empirical evidence, and they say, well, it's possible, but this thing is already well down the road now, and I don't think that's going to make a difference. That's where we're at, I think, as a civilization. So this used to be the map of the world. Everybody remember this? That's not the map anymore. That's not the map anymore. This is the map now. This is the map, and this is a problem. This is a problem, because if we want to maintain democracies, and this is why the establishment's freaking out, because of internet, social media, digital revolution. If you're campaigning, you can't confine your campaign to a town or a county. There's people who are local politicians that have a global following, or national politicians that have a global following. So their size or their amplification can be over-amplified by chat bots or by a foreign fan base or by something. Information can come in to challenge what is the National Security Party line. That's what this country is doing. They just banned anything from Russia, banned it all. You can't even get the URL on the internet because they were afraid that anything coming from that side was going to challenge their party line. Not only that, it would challenge the credibility of our elected leaders. Because if our elected leaders continue to be shown up as charlatans and totally incompetent on so many different things, then we're not going to be able to support them, and they're not going to maintain their authority. So the solution is to build walled gardens, so that internet revolution, that utopia that we all thought was possible in the late 90s is now in the process of being shut down. And it is because it is a noble lie. Our leadership does not believe that they can coexist with that type of environment and stay in power. Now, I'm not afraid of global information. I'm not afraid of any information. In fact, we shouldn't be afraid. In fact, I'm an alternative media practitioner and an alternative journalist or whatever. I wouldn't be doing this if our mainstream media wasn't so bad at what they're putting out. We wouldn't exist. I'd be reading The Guardian. I'd be watching The Beep if they were doing such great journalism. But half of our content is basically exposing, debunking, and showing what a ridiculous job that they're doing and exposing all their lies. That's half of our workload. So you'd think that the BBC and Channel 4 and all these great heavyweight broadcasters would love to have the Russian media up on the internet so that they could pick fun at it every day and do whole segments showing how much propaganda there is and point out all the lies. But it's funny that with all this talk of disinformation, they never pointed out one non-factual statement. I have never seen it. I'm still waiting. It's been years. They've shown us nothing. What's the result of this? The result of this is this inbred intellectual culture that is developing in the political sphere, in the media sphere, whereby they don't know what's going on. Our leaders they can't be informed. They don't have access. They're not looking at all the information. They're listening to each other. They're getting fed propaganda from the BBC and all of our mainstream media outlets. They don't know what's going on in the Donbass. They don't know what's going on in the Ukraine. They've shut themselves off from it. So the decisions they're making right now with our resources are disastrous. It's an absolute disaster. And you could say this is by design. You could say this is part of the great conspiracy, whatever. I think that we are really in that critical phase right now where they're really failing and failing badly. Whose idea was it to shut down the whole economy and pay people to stay home and don't go to work? Whose idea was that? Who came up with that one? Who came up with this idea that everyone had to wear masks and that everyone needs to be vaccinated to protect from this invisible virus? Nobody questioned it. These are terrible ideas. Social distancing. I was in the airport this week, and they still have the footprint on the ground with the COVID thing. And I'm like, what is this? This is a joke. Who can take this seriously? No one's even looking at it. People are just trouncing over it. There's dirt on it. They haven't even scrubbed it. It's disgusting. But it's a remnant of something that is just so over the top, ridiculous. But at the time, a lot of us initially were like, what's going on? Many of us were afraid. And with good reason. Nobody knew what was happening. All we had was our government, we had our mainstream media, and we had our authorities and institutions to help to give us information. And it was very limited. It was very limited. So this is a problem. Democracies might not be able to survive the internet, the free internet. Not that there were democracies very much in recent years, or maybe some might say maybe they never were. Okay? But this is the cycle we're going through now. This is a real bona fide cycle. And I don't think it can be stopped. I don't think that this is something that can be reversed. We have to ride this in the best way we can. We have to rise to the challenge. And if we're faced with something, we need to look at it and really take a good look at it. It's going to be incumbent on all of us to play our role, to do what we need to do as individuals, not be afraid of the truth. I have totally changed my views in the last year on a couple of big issues. In the last 2 years on some massive issues. Okay, and I consider myself fairly well informed about stuff that's going on. I have overhauled my views. Okay, and I'm more and more, to me, this is the way forward. I'm absolutely open to a whole bunch of things that maybe I wouldn't have been open to before, within reason. But that's really my decision. But I don't think ignorance is not going to be an excuse now, not at this critical stage of our civilization. Where are we transitioning to? I don't know. That's probably going to be up to everybody, not just us in this room, but at the royal everyone. I don't know where we're headed. But this is also true. How many times have you seen that? That's real. That's real. A single blade of grass can and will crack a concrete block. And it happens every day. And many of us have been that blade of grass in our lives. Many of us have. I'm sure everybody in this room knows a time, remembers a moment where they stepped or they intervened or they spoke or they thought, which led them to an action that had massive changes down the road. You see, we all have that power. We all retain that power. What the establishment wants you to believe, what the ruling elites, what the machine wants you to believe is that that's not possible. And yet we're reminded of that every day. We just have to look down. There it is. That's the best reminder you'll ever have of your power as an individual. And as much as we're going to be steamrolled, and believe me, get ready for a tsunami of propaganda this winter. It's coming. And it's going to be more outrageous and more over the top than anything you've ever seen before. But it's coming. So we have to rise to the challenge. You know, they've computer modeled the information game, the establishment. I've read a report where they modeled how to control information globally. This was probably done by the RAND Corporation or something in the US that does all the military wargaming. And every single model they ran, no matter what they did, they couldn't stop what they called, or they used a similar term, they couldn't stop the Great Awakening, no matter what they did. So whatever moves they made, as the famous Burns quote of mice and men, best laid plans of mice and men, no matter what they did, they couldn't stop the Great Awakening. It's inevitable. So the question is, you know, how are we going to ride that? Where's that wave going to take us? That's the only question that we should have. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you especially to Andy Thomas. I don't know how I am on time. Am I good on time?
You're actually ahead of time, so if you do want to take a couple of questions, you can.
Sure, yeah.
Anybody likes to ask Patrick anything? Nice easy little lady here.
Just taking off my mask. I've been a radical journalist for 30 years. I'm retired now. I agree with a lot you're saying. I've read Chomsky. I've heard him speak. I think there's a danger in what you say, though. You can't just tell us not to believe things.
Such as?
Climate change. You have to actually.
We're
intelligent people.
I'm not telling you what to believe. I said this is what I believe. It's up to you to get to the truth or the bottom of that.
Yes, but you're saying these are lies.
I believe it is.
But do you not feel when you get up and speak to a group like this that you should give us some evidence?
That's a separate presentation, okay. But I can point you to the work of many renowned climate scientists like Richard Lindzen from Harvard and a number of others from MIT and other even former NASA scientists. Okay, so that's not my area of okay. Science. I'm a political science. I have a master's in political science, but I'm not a climate science. But you don't need to be a climate scientist to know what damage computer modeling can do to society. Neil Ferguson showed us the way. So, what about the islands in the Pacific that are disappearing? Well, there's a number of other examples of, including the Maldives. Nobel Prize winner Niels Axel Morner from, I believe, Norway or Sweden, and the level has not changed. The Pacific Islands sinking is very different than sea levels rising. So, and again, I'm not going to adjudicate that case, but let me tell you, there is a big industry in green journalism. It's a big, big industry. There's much more job openings there than there are in anything else.
We need to have somebody else. But thank you. I think you've made your point. Thank you.
But thank you. No, this is she's right. But that's the kind of debate we need to have. And it's because you brought it up that we can have that debate, and that's what we need to do. Yeah, this is the way to go.
We have a question here, I do believe.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how many people are aware that manipulation of the weather has actually been going on for decades. We know the military said years ago that they would own the weather by 2025. And anybody who is of the older generation may remember that there were serious floods in Linton and Lynmouth back in about the 1950s. They devastated the villages, they wiped out bridges and things like that. 38 people died. One woman had to identify her mother's body by a birthmark on her back because she was missing her head and limbs. They were the most devastating floods that I think we've known for a long time. And the RAF, 50 years later, and there was a BBC audio radio program on it about 50 years later saying that they had admitted to going up cloud seeding. They didn't think it worked, so they went up a second time, and the result was one of the most devastating floods we've had for I don't know how long.
Was there a question on that? Or?
Would you like to respond to that at all?
Other than there's a weather manipulation and cloud seeding and weather modification has been in the works for many, many, many decades. It's established technology. It's real. It's happening. Aerosol programs, chemtrails, or whatever you want to call it. That's been going on for a long, long time. They're just starting to announce it now, saying, "Oh, we're going to do some tests." That means that they've probably been doing it for quite a long time. That's another conversation. But yeah, that's definitely real.
Thank you. Gentleman here, bear with me.
That was great, thank you. Biometric ID systems are being pushed heavily in the global south by the World Bank. Two of the biggest funders of that is the UK government and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Is that the next noble lie?
Gosh. Well, look, of course it is. Of course it is. Seamless travel, electronic, digital travel. Why? Because they said, oh, there's a backlog at the passport office. Oh, we want to speed up those queues at the airports. I would value my privacy above saving 15 minutes or 20 minutes on a journey that I might only make every 6 months. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. How did we survive as a human race without being tracked every single millimeter of our life? I don't know how we made it 2 million years or however long we've been on this planet. So, but the French pushed back. You see, French pushed back. They killed the vaccine passport last week in the legislative branch. So Macron, the president, was trying to do it by executive with his executive programs, and the makeup of the parliament's changed recently as a result of the last legislative election. You have strange coalitions forming, and freedom is now sort of in vogue in France. Okay, if France doesn't get this through, then forget the EU. And if the EU doesn't have it, then everybody else can't do it. Does that mean they're going to give up and stop? No. They'll try it through another way, via another crisis, or through another bill, or maybe they'll just ram it down our throats. But at least you can see that politics does work sometimes. We can look to the French for a little bit of inspiration there. They can teach us a thing or two.
Anybody else? Well, look, Patrick, thank you so much for that. I think you have indeed done a lot here to help people see what's going on and keep doing what you're doing. Patrick Henningsen.
Ready.